Schönen guten Abend, mein Name ist Barbara Cohen, für die, die mich nicht kennen. Ich habe heute die Freude, Yaron Brook, einen lieben alten Freund hier begrüßen zu dürfen, der uns etwas über Capitalism wieder mal erzählen wird. Yaron Brook ist auch ein Speaker bei unserer Free Market Roadshow und bei vielen anderen Events. Dem einen oder anderen ist er ja wahrscheinlich ohnedies schon durch seine Publikationen bekannt. Er ist der Präsident des Ayn Rand Institute und hat seine eigene Yaron Brook Show und YouTube-Videos. Da sind ganz viele Sachen drauf. Ich kann vor allem den jungen Leuten das nur empfehlen, auch auf den Kanal zu gehen. Er hat hier auch noch was von dem Programm Ayn Rand Con in which I switched to English because that's easy. Apologies again, Yaron, for studying German. The Ayn Rand conference, which starts every year in April in Porto, which is also a very good and nice event for especially young people to get to touch base with whatever is not only Austrian economics but Ayn Rand and capitalism. And before that, well, of course, Yaron publishes frequently and not only books but articles, and he's a speaker across the world, has traveled to I don't know which country you might not have been, but I would say without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us.
Okay, so one of the phenomena that I've at least noticed, and I think many people have noticed over the last few years, is that today, and progressively so over the last decade or so, we're all socialists now. I mean, it used to be not that long ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, that people on the right, conservatives and others in politics, at least gave lip service to capitalism. They at least pretended that they were for free markets. They didn't do much when they got into power to move us towards free markets, but they at least pretended. They put on a show of the importance of free markets. They're more efficient, they greater GDP growth, all the economic arguments for why capitalism and free markets are a good thing. But the reality is that in the world in which we live today, the parties on the right, in the conventional left-right spectrum, we know what the left thinks, right? So we recognize that they've always been anti-markets and anti-capitalism. But the parties of the right generally, in most countries, certainly in the United States, and to some extent in Europe, have moved dramatically away from even the pretense, even pretending they care about capitalism and they care about free markets. Now, I'm familiar particularly with the US, and so I'll give you some examples of the US, but you can see it in Europe. It's likely that Marine Le Pen's party will win in France in the next election, I think. It's hard to tell with the French, but that looks like the most likely outcome. Well, I mean, they have come out explicitly for the expansion of the welfare state, not the shrinkage of the welfare state. When Macron a few times has actually proposed some sensible programs to actually move towards a little bit more liberalization, it is the far right that is being against it. I mean, the only issue that defines them as far right versus the far left in France is immigration. There's almost no other issue that separates them in terms of economic policy. They both want to spend, like there's no tomorrow. And of course, I think everybody here, probably more than I am, is aware of the fact that French debt is out of control, and it's a question really of how they're going to pay this debt back without, dragging the rest of Europe down. If you look at Nigel Farage in the UK, for a long time there was some idea that Farage had some sympathies for markets and for capitalism, but those have been dissipated. They've gone. It's now clear that Farage, again, is shifting leftwards on economic policy. No pension reform, no privatization, quite the contrary. He's talked about nationalizing industries, even more aggressively than the current Labour Party that is in charge of the UK. So he is going further to the left on economic policies than even the current Labour Party that's in the UK. I think the same is true of the AfD in Germany. There's really no suggestion that what makes them popular is an advocacy of capitalism or free markets, and they're really not. That's not at the heart of what they propose or what they do. Conservatives throughout Europe have chosen to conserve. To conserve issues around ethnicity and around immigration and around culture and talk that talk. But when it comes to economics, they're not interested in any kind of significant reform that moves us towards more freedom. They have aligned themselves much more with leftist policies with that regard. And, of course, this is true in the United States. It's really true everywhere in the world with one exception, which we can talk about. What's the one exception in the world? Argentina. The one exception is Javier Milei, and we can talk about Milei, where you're seeing a real move towards free markets and a real move towards liberalization. Donald Trump is not a capitalist. He doesn't believe in it. He doesn't think it's valuable. Donald Trump has no real set of beliefs in terms of ideas. But it's clear that he believes in a managed economy. He believes in central planning by him, preferably, but central planning. We have a situation where, the entire Republican Party, or big chunks of the Republican Party now support tariffs, support restrictions on trade, which, and you can ask me in the Q&A if you want to get into a detailed analysis of tariffs, it makes no sense by any standard. No economist who knows anything about economics can support these tariffs. They don't make sense politically. They don't make sense culturally. Maybe they make sense politically in appeasing the particular special interest group that is, a MAGA within the United States. But, none of the goals that the administration has set for tariffs are achievable, will be achieved, and pretty much anybody who has studied economics knows that. And yet they insist. Just like the leftists, like you tell the leftists, socialism doesn't work. Rent control, it doesn't work. We've tried it like 550 times, and it never works. Oh, no, this time we'll get it right. Just this time, we'll tinker with it, we'll get it just right. Well, the same attitude you're seeing now from the right when it comes to tariffs. They don't work, they don't achieve what you want. I mean, you've got Republicans now patting themselves on the shoulder and being proud of the fact that tariff revenue is up. Tariff revenue is up so they can shrink the government deficit. Well, we all know that if you raise taxes, you get more revenue and the deficit shrinks. Well, unless you believe in supply side, and then long-term revenue actually shrinks, but that's a whole other story, right? And suddenly Republicans are proud of the fact that they've raised taxes while they continue to advocate for supposedly lower taxes. So you see it there. Maybe the most scary thing that's happening in the U.S. right now is the fact that for the first time, really, the American government is actively pursuing taking ownership stakes in private companies. Right? So here's a hallmark of socialism: is the state owns the means of production. Right? That is, in many cases, the definition of socialism. And here we have the United States government, really for the first time, actively going out there and investing as an investor and taking percentages. Now, not taking majority stakes, it's only 10% for now. But you can imagine if these companies get into trouble and the federal government has to put more money into them, they will take higher stakes in them. And whereas that happened, for example, during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, the understanding then was, we'll sell as soon as the crisis is over, we'll sell the stock. Here, no. Here it's a strategic investment, long-term. So, for example, the Trump administration is taking a 10% stake in Intel. Intel, the microchip manufacturer, deciding who the winners and losers are. Intel is probably a loser. It probably needs massive, deep restructuring if it will survive at all. And the United States government has decided that it's going to convert it from a loser to a winner in this incredibly competitive space, which is chip design and chip manufacturing. It's also taking stakes in a number of mining companies, rare earth materials. There's rumors that they want to take a stake in quantum computing, which is talk about speculation, right? There's a speculative field to begin with. Nobody knows if this will ever work. But the United States government is going to take an equity stake in some of these, I guess, startup companies. And of course, this all started with the golden share. This is a share that gives them control over the board, but not a financial interest in U.S. Steel. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Nippon Steel, the Japanese company, was going to buy U.S. Steel. Some of the labor unions weren't happy with this, so they lobbied Biden last year to stop the deal. So Biden, in spite of nobody thinking there was any problem with this, remember it's Nippon Steel, which is Japanese, not Chinese. It's a friendly country. It's an ally. Nobody thought there was any kind of national security issue. Biden decided to kill the deal. Trump comes in and says, maybe there's an opportunity here. He comes up with some kind of structure of a deal where the U.S. government now is an owner of U.S. Steel. Carnegie must be rolling in his grave. On no front are we seeing an advocacy for a commitment to policies that are going to move us towards more economic freedom, more economic liberty, towards capitalism. It's really not even on the table. I mean, the discussions in the United States today do not revolve around issues related to economic freedom. Nobody seems to care. Lower taxes. And we've got a debt problem. We're not sure exactly how to solve the debt problem. We'll ignore it. We won't think about it. We won't talk about it. And we'll deregulate a little bit, not too much, but a little bit, because primarily for energy, because for some reason Trump has decided energy is important. So we'll deregulate energy, but not across the board. Nothing too massive, right? Nothing like. Do you know what a U.S. administration is? A quiz, right? What U.S. administration did the most deregulation in American history? I mean, on large scale, industry, whole industries.
Reagan did a lot.
Reagan is what you'd think, right?
The 1920s, I guess. Probably not.
No, the 1920s there was no regulation to deregulate. So the 1920s, everything was already deregulated. There'd been no real regulation. The regulation was the creation of the Fed in the teens, and that was not undone. So actually, the largest deregulations that happened in American history, and you could look this up, is under Jimmy Carter. I know, Jimmy Carter. But all the major deregulations, airlines were deregulated. There were price controls in airlines before deregulation, in the United States. Routes were determined by the government. There was a commission that determined routes. Trucking was deregulated under Jimmy Carter. Brokerages, finance was deregulated under Jimmy Carter. Reagan added to that. But the biggest deregulation bills were all done under, of all people, Jimmy Carter. Right? Reagan benefited from it and added to it. But all we remember is the things, Reagan was the guy. Well, there's no discussion about any of that. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody wants to put the political capital into it, getting bills passed in Congress. Generally, who cares about Congress, right? You write executive orders and you get away with all of that. There is no energy. There's no intellectual fire. There's nobody talking about more liberty when it comes to economics. There just isn't. If you look at the free market economists in the United States today, we're playing defense. It's all about defense. It's all about stopping the bad stuff from happening. There's no advocacy for more freedom and more liberty. And, again, when you travel around Europe, I think you see the same thing. Europe is in trouble. Everybody knows Europe is in trouble. There's very little innovation. There's very little entrepreneurship. There's no economic growth. There's massive amounts of debt. And the solution is obvious. Even the EU, when they commissioned a study about what to do about economic growth in Europe, they came back and said, deregulate. and the latest is, there was a headline somewhere, loosen up your labor laws to make it easier to fire people, because when you make it easier to fire people, then you make it easier to hire people. You're not going to hire people if you can't fire them. But Europe's doing nothing, right? All I hear is new regulations coming out of Brussels. I don't hear of any massive, substantial deregulation. When it comes to artificial intelligence, Europe is way behind. It's no way close to either the United States or to China. And even in, this is weird, but even in China, the appetite for more economic freedom it has been reduced dramatically. I mean, I used to visit China regularly, and in the early 2000s, the 90s and the early 2000s, and into the 20-teens, China was liberalizing. It was opening up. It was freeing up industries, particularly in tech. It was making it easier to start businesses, easier to keep profits, easier to enter new markets, and then it started clamping down. And since it started clamping down, growth has come down. I think innovation and entrepreneurship have come down. New business formation has come down dramatically. And there's no renewed energy around economic freedom, even though there was a real push during those decades for more and more freedom. All of that has been really shut down. Again, if you look all over the world, I really, there's a new conservative prime minister in Japan, the first woman to be prime minister in Japan's history. And and she's supposedly very conservative. And I was going, okay, and they call her the Margaret Thatcher of Japan. So like she's an iron lady. So I was like very excited because I thought, okay, so she's going to be a liberalizer like Margaret Thatcher. She's going to bring economic freedom. And they say she's conservative on everything except economics. On economics, she's very much for state control and traditional Japanese kind of state management of the economy. It really is depressing. It really is depressing. Coming out of the 1980s, there was a real energy around free markets. There was a real energy around capitalism. It was spreading around the world. Countries were liberalizing, deregulating, opening up. Trade flourished. Trade made us all richer, dramatically richer. And there was, there was this unbelievable excitement. And that has come to a complete halt and is reversed. Statism is on the rise. Statism is sexy. If you look at young people in America today, they're not going to free market organizations and free market groups. They're going to kind of right-wing, culturally right-wing organizations that have nothing to do with economic liberty. And of course, the question needs to be asked as why. And I think a lot of this, at the end of the day, I think has to do with the intellectuals' failure in terms of defending capitalism, presenting capitalism. I think as an exciting project. Liberalization is something of great value that should be pursued by young people. Capitalism. I remember a time when to be pro-free market was sexy. Right? Young people were excited about it. I remember in Brazil there were these T-shirts. You remember less Marx, more Mises, right? Less Marx, and thousands of people in the street. That's all gone. It's all gone. Once Bolsonaro came to power, that disappeared. And again, the right became much more culturally right and less interested in economics. And of course, the question is why? What happened? And what is going on in the world around us. And I think there are really two dimensions to this. I think the first is something that happened in the world out there, and the second is kind of our failure in terms of defending capitalism. I think in terms of what happened in the world, and this is particularly true of the West, but I think it's also true of China, is the financial crisis of 2008-2009. 2008-2009 was clearly and unequivocally blamed on capitalism. Every headline in the world was about the failure of capitalism, the failure of markets, the failure of greed, the failure of Wall Street. This was an outcome of greedy bankers on Wall Street. Now, a friend of mine who was a banker, not on Wall Street, but a banker, used to say, it's interesting that in 2007 there was no greed on Wall Street and it all showed up in 2008. Right? I mean, Wall Street's always greedy. So the idea that it's the same with greedflation, right? There's inflation because businesses are greedy. Businesses are always greedy. So there should always be inflation. They should only be raising prices. It's just dumb economics. 2008, 2009 was unequivocally blamed on capitalism, and the voices who oppose that, the voices who say, no, this isn't capitalism, this is statism causes, government policy causes, government housing policy, government financial regulation policy, you could go on and on what caused the financial crisis, but one thing we know, it wasn't markets. It wasn't capitalism. There was no capitalism in 2007 that failed in 2008. There was a mixed economy. And what part of the mix just failed? The most regulated ones. Housing, banking, finance. Those are the most regulated industries in the US at least, and in many other parts of the world. They're the ones who failed. That's what failed. But the voices of those of us who believe that were muted. We didn't get the coverage. There weren't enough of us. And the story of 2008, 2009, as caused by capitalism, and capitalism is unworthy, stuck. Just like, if I ask, maybe not people in this room, but if I ask people in any room what caused the Great Depression, almost everybody will say Wall Street and speculation and markets and unfettered capitalism. Now, no economist believes that. No economist in the world believes that anymore, right? We've had study after study after study have shown that it wasn't markets that caused the Great Depression. Nobody cares. Right? The historians still teach that. They teach that in school. They teach that everywhere. Same has happened with the financial crisis. No real economist believes the story of markets caused the financial crisis, but everybody else does. And we have had no success in educating them otherwise. And the reality is that has really tainted people's perception of capitalism, particularly in America, in the United States, which generally had a positive view. And suddenly they said, our system has failed. We need something new. It's why Obama was elected. Now, so that is kind of the existential, cause, the thing that happened that changed people's minds. China, by the way, if you look at China's shift away from liberalization of markets happened around that time. Because it looked at the West and it said, okay, we've been following this Western model. We've been trying to emulate the West. But look, it failed. They collapsed. So we don't want that. Maybe we should find our own way, and maybe that way has more to do with government involvement. Again, the lesson was markets failed, so we don't want too much markets. We want more government intervention. So a general loss in confidence in capitalism and free markets happened in that period of time. I think the second challenge is that those of us who defend capitalism, many of us who defend capitalism, have not addressed the fundamental challenges that people present around capitalism. We've got the economics down. Right? There's no economic argument that free market economists cannot answer. The economics is done. It was done with Mises and Hayek and the rest of the Austrians. They know their stuff. And the reality is that they can explain every one of these market phenomena and why they fail and why they succeed. And not only that, but we can point to success. Like, I have no doubts that what Milei is doing is going to generate relative prosperity in Argentina. Why? Because the laws of economics work. They do. They always do. Everywhere they try it, they do. Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan's deregulations led to prosperity. That kind of policy always leads to prosperity. So we make the economic arguments constantly. It's like rent control, right? You can try 550 times, but they want to try it one more time. Right? Or so many of the other policies, like tariffs, that they just want to try over and over and over again, in spite of the fact that we know they're not well. Because ultimately, the objections to capitalism are not about the economics. The economics, we won that debate when Hayek Keynes, have you seen that rap thing, right? That rap video of Hayek and Keynes debating. That was, we won that. Keynes is wrong, Hayek is right on economics. Mises is right on economics. That's not where the challenge is. The problem is not the economics of it. The problem is the cultural, your moral, political issues regarding capitalism. That's what people are uncomfortable with. The economics, we know exactly how they'll play out. We know exactly what will happen. Well, we don't know the details because that's the beauty of markets. We never know the details. But we know that freedom leads to prosperity. We know that economic freedom leads to greater GDP growth and GDP per capita. But you know what the right in America is now answering, just like the left used to answer? Not everything is GDP. Not everything is about economic prosperity. And they're right, not everything is about GDP. It's just GDP helps with all the rest of the stuff. So, there are people in the Midwest who've never found jobs. And, you could really dig in to figure out why there's unemployment among people who used to have steel jobs and used to have auto jobs and used to have other jobs and they don't anymore. And there's a lot one could say about the reasons for all that. But it's much easier, much easier politically, culturally, even psychologically, to say it's the Chinese. That's why I don't have a job. They took my job. They stole it. It's so much easier than actually a kind of a sociological analysis of why are these people not working. Because there are lots of other reasons why they're not working. And there's no shortage of jobs in America, by the way. Lots of jobs. And yet you've got pockets of unemployment in certain places. So they're frustrated. And you can't expect them to figure out why they don't have a job. Partly, that is the role of the intellectual, is to explain what's going on in the world to people, to the common people, who don't know economics, who don't know what's going on in the world. But again, it's been much easier for politicians and for many intellectuals to say, China shock. China did it. Which is blatantly untrue from an economics perspective. We know that most of the jobs that were lost in manufacturing were lost to technology. They were lost to simple increases in productivity, which happens all the time. The number of people working in manufacturing in the United States has declined as manufacturing has actually increased. America makes more stuff today than it ever has before, just with a far fewer employees. Just like in agriculture, 150 years ago, how many people worked in agriculture? 80+% of the population. Today, less than 1% in America at least. And how much food is produced? A lot more with the 1% than when we had 80%. So yes, manufacturing is going to go through the same thing. You're going to have fewer people making a lot more stuff, and soon there are going to be really a few people. I don't know if you've seen these factories in China. See these factories in China? They're called no-light factories. Because nobody ever has to turn the lights on or off. Because the factories work 24 hours, 7 days a week with no human beings inside. They're all robots, and they're working constantly, and they're producing high-quality stuff with 100% automation. Maybe somebody has to go in there to fix something when something breaks, but that's about it. That's the future, whether we like it or not. So what's going to happen to manufacturing jobs? They're going to shrink. No matter what we do, they're going to shrink. But where's the politician who has the guts, the courage to say that and to explain that that's actually a good thing? Because another thing we know from economics is the more productivity we have, the more jobs we have. Jobs shrink in agriculture and grow somewhere else. They shrink in manufacturing and they grow somewhere else. There's no shortage of jobs in the world, and there never will be. Why will there never be shortage of jobs? Because human desires, human wants are infinite. There's no limit to what we want and what we desire, and the imagination of the things we might want and desire in the future. Jobs will change, but they will not go away. But people are afraid. Because they can't think long term, and they don't understand economics, and they don't understand the big picture. But nobody's telling them, yes, right now, manufacturing jobs are disappearing, not because of China, but because of automation, which is a good thing. We're going to get richer. As we get richer, we'll create new jobs at a much higher rate. You should be happy. And the new jobs are going to be better than the old jobs, which is, again, a pattern that we've seen for the last 250 years. The new jobs created are easier and better than the old jobs. They pay more, and they're also less physically demanding. So they weigh you down less physically. Again, who's going to say that? Who has made that case, that argument? Instead, we have politicians latching onto the idea it's all because of China. It's China's faults. Oh, it's not just China. Who else is at fault? Who else takes jobs away from Americans? And I'm sure from Europeans as well.
The Mexicans.
What's that?
The Mexicans.
The Mexicans, immigrants. Right, immigrants. So let's round up immigrants who are working in their workplace, drag them out of the workplace, put them in vans, and ship them back to where they came from. Shrinking the population of working people in the United States, which ultimately has to have negative impact on GDP. GDP is a function of the number of people working. So you're taking hardworking people who are willing to do jobs, willing to work, and you're shipping them out because it's easier to say to people, your jobs were taken away by Mexicans, not by machines, not by increasing productivity, and you'll get your jobs back. They never will. One of the big problems is we keep telling them their jobs are coming back, so they're sitting and waiting, and waiting, and waiting. They could get in a car and drive somewhere with their other jobs. They could go get a job, but no, they're waiting for their old job to come back because politicians and intellectuals, primarily on the left, but now on the right, are telling them the jobs are coming back. Don't worry about it. So, we're telling them a false story. We are exacerbating a culture of resentment and hatred towards the other that have taken my jobs. And as a consequence, markets don't work. Trade doesn't work because all the jobs go to China. And we don't make anything in America anymore. That's the story that we hear everywhere. We don't make anything in America. I can show you the graph that we make more than ever. Nobody cares. They've been told the story over and over again. It's sunk in. It's the same with the left, right? You tell the left, and now the right, the same thing, right? Everybody's convinced wages have been flat for the last 20 years, right? They peaked. You know what the golden era of American economy was, according to so many of the advocates on the left and the right? The 1970s. That was the golden age of the American economy. Now, some of you are old enough to remember the 1970s, and maybe you visited America in the 1970s. It sucked. It was terrible. You had stagflation. You had crime was much higher than it is today. The streets were much filthier. The buildings were much filthier. The 70s were a terrible era economically. Wages have gone up dramatically since the 1970s. In every respect, quality of life, standard of living have gone up dramatically since the 1970s. Nobody wants to believe it because they're also mired in their own misery. And they want justification. It's the Chinese. They've stopped wage growth in America. And again, you can show them the graph over and over and over again. It doesn't matter. Facts. It's very hard to dissuade people who are committed to an idea with facts. One of the sad things about human beings. So, we have a population that is convinced that capitalism and markets generally and trade have worked against them. They've been anti them. And this is playing out as a cultural phenomenon, part of the culture wars. This is about immigrants. This is about foreigners. This is about other people. That plays politically. And Donald Trump has shown that it plays politically. It's a huge success politically. And therefore everybody doubles down on it because it worked for Donald Trump. Let's keep the thing going. The truth doesn't matter. Economics doesn't matter. What matters is the politics. And of course, there's always been something about capitalism that people don't like anyway. Because what's capitalism about? What do people do in capitalism?
Making profits.
Yeah, you make money, you make a profit. Capitalism inherently is about self-interest. It's about the self-interest of the producer who's making money. Not only money. What else are the producers all excited about? It's fun, hopefully, to make stuff, right? Businessmen really are greedy. They're selfish. They go out there and they produce stuff because it's fun and they want to make money. And I know when you go shopping, right? When you guys go shopping to the mall to buy a new suit or new shoes or something like that, I mean, you're just being good Keynesians and you're just doing it to stimulate the economy. Right? Make sure people have jobs. Right? That's why everybody goes shopping. No, I mean, you go shopping because you want to make yourself better. I mean, the beauty of trade is it's win-win. Both parties are pursuing their self-interest. There's no conflict. There's harmony. I buy my iPhone. I'm better off. Apple is better off. Both parties are better off. That's true of every transaction you engage in the marketplace. I mean, unless you're making a mistake. We all make mistakes. Buy stuff that's not worth it. But generally, we enter the transaction with the intent of being better off. In other words, markets are places in which we pursue our self-interest. Markets are places in which celebrate self-interest. And the more money we make, the more money we have to invest, the more money we can make more. It is a kind of a machine that perpetuates virtue if you consider making money and pursuing your self-interest a virtue. But who in the world considers that? Right? What did your mothers teach you about self-interest? Or your preachers, priests, or your philosophers? What did they teach you about self-interest? It's a bad thing. Don't do it. Think of other people first. Sacrifice. Place the interest of other people ahead of your own interest. That's what my mother taught me. Capitalism starts out with this massive problem. In a sense, we have an economic system that has outpaced our philosophy, that's outpaced our morality. We have a morality that fits a zero-sum world. We have a morality that fits the Middle Ages. All about zero-sum, sacrifice, giving up, caring about others more than about yourself. The group matters, the collective matters, the individual not at all. And yet capitalism demands an individual take care of himself. Capitalism demands responsibility, that you take responsibility over your life. Capitalism demands that you have ambition, that you seek out that better job, that you retrain yourself, that you do things to make your life better. Capitalism demands that you take your life seriously as an individual. But nobody teaches that. And nobody tells you that's a virtue, and that's what you should be doing, and that's how you should live. No, the whole purpose of morality is to teach you how to sacrifice other people. That's socialism. Socialism is great with our morality. Morality of altruism, of otherism. Socialism is perfect. It's great on sacrifice. Right? Constantly sacrificing some to others. It's great on the collective and denouncing the individual. And yet we want to have the morality of socialism and the economics of capitalism. That does not work. So one of the great failures, I think, of the free market world, free market movement over the last 100 years is that they've not been willing to challenge, with one exception, they've not been willing to challenge the conventional morality, the conventional moral code that drives most people and drives the culture as we have it. The one exception is Ayn Rand, who is willing to rethink morality. Not because she was an advocate of capitalism, but because the morality that exists didn't make sense to her. And to embrace a morality that says that self-interest is your moral purpose. Self-interest properly understood, properly defined, properly engaged. What we need are virtues around self-interest. And if you're a self-interested individual, if you take your life seriously, if you want to live the best life that you can live for yourself, then there is really only one economic system that allows you to do that provides you with the opportunities to do that. But it requires work, it requires taking care of yourself, it requires self-responsibility. But that's what we should be teaching. That's a morality that we should be teaching. And that system is capitalism. So if we, I think in this room, we all value free markets and we value capitalism, I think the challenge for us is to move beyond just the economic arguments and to talk about the cultural issues and to talk about the moral issues and to challenge the conventional way people think about the world, about their life, and about the economic system around us. Because one thing is clear. Right now, we are losing. And to win, we're going to have to be a lot more radical than we've been in the past. We're going to have to be not only radical in economics, but we're going to have to be radical in our philosophical outlook and our outlook on the culture around us. Thank you.